I am so excited about this talk right now, you guys. I have Billy Dees in the studio with me today. We are going to be talking about passion for sound, social audio to podcasting. I am Maria. This is the Strong Body, Strong Soul show. If you haven't been here before, I talk about energy. I am really passionate about helping people find their voices out here in the world. So podcasting, social audio, the whole gamut. We're going to have so much fun today. Hello, how are you doing today? And thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Wow, you are a professional broadcaster, and I have been so impressed with some of your advice and some of your insights that you've been sharing in Twitter Spaces. There are so many different ways to communicate out here in the world. And I think that especially with the pandemic, it's made it so great for people to reach out into the world and mingle with other people and share common interests and such. And wow, I know that most of the people out here on social audio are trying to either sell things or make connections and make friends out there, or there are a lot of mental health kind of situations going on out there too.
Yeah.
So that is what I like to talk about sometimes, is that need to share our voices and to communicate instead of repressing what we're thinking and feeling, especially right now. And you talk about that stuff on your show sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Mental health and well-being in general is something that the podcast covers. And that often ties into a personal journey, which I feel not only, helps the people who are in the group, whatever it may be, mental health or addiction recovery, or if you've been, a lot of people have been on the show that have been in some sort of a bad accident or something, and they had to rebuild their lives. Not only does it help those communities, but I believe just people in general enjoy the human story. So it's really good for the listeners because the listeners get a cross section of what people are going through, what they've experienced. And I believe that's the best kind of content in general. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that, human connection comes through the storytelling of all of us, and that whole idea of empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
And wanting to help other people to reduce their suffering and pain in this world.
Yeah.
Knowing that they need to go through it. I think talking about it and finding other people that have similar stories helps so very much.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Everybody, I think the most important, one of the most important caveats to any type of content is the idea that you can tell people that they're not alone, no matter how unique you think your situation is. Somebody has gone through either the same thing or something very similar.
Right.
They got through it, and so can you.
Yeah. I also think that, well, let's talk about the idea of mixing it up on all of these platforms out here. There are so many different platforms between Twitter Spaces and Clubhouse and YouTube. Isn't audio only, but I think there's such power in just the audio. I don't mind going on video, but sometimes it can be kind of distracting. And I think you can feel someone's energy and their personality. You can sense someone's integrity out there. And I think that's so important. It's such a gift, right?
Yeah.
I mean, millions of people are on Twitter.
Right.
And here we are, you and I, Billy, and so many people that I've met on Twitter just are such good people. And no matter what happens, by the way, with the platform, it's like we all are moving around from platform to platform, and it's okay. It's all right. I think that the best thing we can do is create energy. I call it energy. I mean, if you are a serious content creator and everything's content, right? So I remember when I first started podcasting, people would ask me and they'd say, how do you come up with things to talk about? I'm like, life is filled with content. Everywhere you look, there's some gift of beauty or pain. It's not all pretty either. It's not all butterflies and rainbows, but we need to talk about it. I think social audio has opened up a whole different world.
Oh, sure.
And I think a lot of us are making good use of it, frankly. And I want to ask you about how you're doing it, because a lot of people are taking social audio and they're actually, let's talk tech for a second, for a minute, because you guys, the title of this talk is Passion for Sound, right? We're going to talk about moving social audio to podcasting. But I wanted to start off a little bit with some of the reasons why we're out here, because that is the most important thing. But when we're talking about social audio, why don't we tell me a little bit, let's tell our audience a little bit about Twitter Spaces, for instance. That's where Billy and I have met, but we've also been on some of the other platforms. I'd love to hear your way of describing Twitter Spaces.
Sure. Let me just back up just a moment, because you did mention the importance of audio. I do believe that audio is its own type of medium. A lot of times you can say, well, you can do audio and video, we can do this and that. Yes, a video has an audio component to it. But so often video, I've worked with, I do video. And I try not to fall into this trap when we're setting up shots and we're working the set. We worry about the lights, we worry about the background, and almost like an afterthought. Oh yeah, we got to get a microphone pinned on them just before we go on, right? And it is a different thing. You were talking about the type of communication involved. You're vocalizing, so you have to get your message across through your words, and it's not just your vocabulary, but it's how you speak, how you put emphasis on certain syllables, the texture, the sincere type of tone that you have in your voice. That's all very much a part of it. Yeah. So taking that to social audio, that's kind of where I feel, you just to touch on tech a little bit. I prefer a dedicated microphone. It doesn't have to be a fancy one, but I like what's called the proximity effect. And you can achieve that inexpensively. And quite frankly, just for social audio, whether it be Twitter or whatever, I don't necessarily recommend that you spend a lot of money. But the idea that you want to get the microphone close to your mouth. So with that being said, depending on what your approach is as a creator, we all have our different mindset. Twitter Spaces is pretty much, let's say, an audio forum where you have a host or a pair of hosts. You can have roughly, give or take, depending on how many are hosts and how many are speakers. You have about a dozen speakers. Hosts have a special ability to manage the room. And then, of course, you can have people just listening. I don't know what the limit is, but my guess is it's got to be in the stratosphere. Just people listening. There isn't too much of a limit that I am aware of in terms of
thousands. I think thousands have been in spaces before.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Somebody like Gary V or somebody like that gets on there, and there's going to be a lot of people on there. Yes. So you can kind of manage the room any way you choose. Most people like to have people who want to speak, raise their hand or whatever. And there's a way you can do that on the app. That keeps the space in an orderly fashion, but the content is only limited by your imagination. I mean, my wheelhouse is authors a lot, so creative types, and in people who have a cause, whether it be mental health, addiction recovery. I know that you are in some groups now that do, women's empowerment and things like that. These are all great things, and here again, it's only limited by what your imagination wants to put forth. Right. The nice thing about Twitter, I hope Twitter is Twitter's going through a lot of changes right now. I'm not necessarily alarmed by those changes. As a matter of fact, I'm very optimistic because the social media world needed a shakeup. There was too much of the same mindset with all of these platforms, and somebody needed to come along and shake the cage a little bit. I think Elon is going to do that. With that being said, I don't have any specific predictions in terms of what is going to happen to Twitter Spaces. but for right now, I kind of like Twitter Spaces because all those audiences that I just mentioned, whether it's authors, people with cause, all these poets, artists, all these people have found communities on Twitter. And what's nice about Twitter is those people are already there. It's not like we are starting our own app and we're calling it, the widget app. And we have to bring all those people on to participate. They're already on Twitter. Right. So that aspect of it, I really like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, millions of people, obviously. Yeah. But I got to Twitter Spaces because Clubhouse started to feel too overwhelming to me, which is so ridiculous because Twitter is so much bigger. Yeah. But I found the community in the Twitter Spaces really vibrant. Yeah. And there are so many people that are excited about it. And I love the idea. It seems a lot of people that I've met there, like you, are all about knowledge is meant to be shared.
Oh, absolutely.
We're all kind of guessing, pushing these buttons and such too, because a lot of times, obviously, the platform keeps changing. Whether if you guys are familiar with Twitter Spaces, you can have a chat in there. You can clip other people's voices while they're speaking a little bit to share them in good, positive ways. But of course, there's always room for the bad actors to take advantage too. So it's always tricky. Yeah. I think that it's really important that people realize too. By the way, when they go onto any of these social audio platforms, I always like to remind people that they are not pressured into hosting a room or a space or a talk, whatever you want to call it. I was over on Wisdom earlier today, and you can certainly contribute by being in the audience as well on Twitter Spaces with the emojis and stuff like that, and connecting with people who are in the audience. And there are so many different ways to connect. Yeah. And I think it's funny because I think on YouTube, people are starting to use the shorts more because that short form video is becoming so popular, right? Like TikTok. But it's so short, but I've been using it a lot just to do voiceover onto some of my photography and such too. Oh, okay. And that's powerful too. Yeah. I mean, I did one for our talk here, just literally 30 seconds with a little bit of voice on it. And it goes out there to draw people in. Tell me a little bit what your impression is. Like you said, I mean, I think we both, audio is where it's at. And I think that for me as a meditation teacher, the audio is particularly important because when I am guiding someone through a meditation, it is just that person and me. So my voice needs to have nothing in the way. Yeah. It needs to be, it's very personal. Obviously, it's anonymous. I don't know who's listening to my voice. And that's what gives me strength out here, frankly, knowing that I don't have control over where my voice goes. And I think the odd counterbalance to that is that means I'm not afraid to share it everywhere too. Sure. Because I'm not saying, listen. I do not go around saying, you have to meditate. It reminds me of when my daughter was selling Girl Scout cookies, right? People would see me and they'd run the other way. No. It's like everybody does what they need to do. Yeah. And that is such a concept that I hope that more creators would kind of evolve to, because I think especially in a lot of different communities, but I have a podcast community on Facebook and it has 6,000 members, and people are so excited to share their links with no explanation. Yeah. And even when I ask, what is your show about? They're like, oh, you have to listen to it to find out. Yeah. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
life is short. Life is short. So let's talk about how people are moving the audio off of some of these social audio platforms. Because I think we would both agree, I think the quality of the sound is not that good on Twitter
Yeah.
Spaces. You
Yeah.
can't get that robust sound there. You can get that more on Wisdom or Clubhouse.
Hmm.
But depending on the content, I'm not sure if it really matters,
Yeah, it really depends.
right?
For something like what you're doing, let's say you're doing a sequence where you're doing a meditation or some sort of a thing where people are going to sit down and go through this procedure,
Mhm.
listening to it, that I would certainly advise that that's recorded as best as possible, because
Yeah.
getting back to what we were saying about the audio, your voice goes just a few inches and then goes right into someone's ear, and that's very powerful, and you want to
Mhm.
capitalize on that.
Yeah.
I have found, for me, I prefer my podcast, which is the Billy Dees podcast. I try to do as much in studio stuff as possible. However, there are times, let's say when, well, Elon Musk right now is a perfect example. There's a lot of people who want to talk about that. A lot of that banter is very entertaining.
Mhm.
So I would be tempted to do a space about that and record that audio and then repurpose it.
Right.
And here again, the sound quality itself doesn't need to be as stellar, because
Right.
you have a different type of content. You have a lot of banter. You have a lot of dumb comments, which are entertaining a lot of times, and then you have the really intelligent comments right in there with them. So you have a lot to pick from. There's a lot of ear candy going on there.
Yeah.
So that's the type of thing that I would repurpose. Now I know there's people out there who use social audio for the purpose of producing their podcast. I'm not there, and I'm not sure I'll ever be there. There's other types of content that I like to produce for audio only that has nothing to do with social audio. But
Right.
there are times when I like to incorporate it. And also, too, I think that repurposing does the forums a lot of good, because, quite frankly, I believe Twitter Spaces, the awareness of Twitter users is around 1%. That
Mhm.
means that people know about, that are on Twitter, know about Twitter Spaces. That number is 1% of the users.
That's nothing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you could make the comment, well, that's still over a million people. If you have 100 million people using it in the United States, I don't know how many. They say there's 200 and some odd million. So I'm not exactly sure how much of that is
Yeah.
in the United States where we are, in other places. But so you have 1 or 2 million people, but in fact, that's only 1% of the users. So it's nice to have that stuff on other platforms, because people hear it and they say, well, this was recorded on Twitter Spaces, and then they have an awareness for it.
Right. Right.
Um, so I do feel that does the social media platforms good when you repurpose it, and as long as you
Mhm.
can do it in a way where the content is appropriate for that. I
Right.
don't necessarily, me personally, like I said, I don't have an issue with that. I would say that, keep in mind, as an audio creator, that there's other things that you can do besides social audio to make your audio content really well. Yeah.
Oh,
So that's
absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I will say a lot of people are using Twitter Spaces for such things as trauma recovery
yes,
and very serious things, topics like that, where people are sharing their voices. Now,
yeah,
one of the things that I think people need to be aware of is that when you go onto a social audio platform of any type, your voice is being recorded.
yeah,
Even if it says it's not, you
yeah,
have to be careful if it's important to you
yeah.
to maintain your own privacy, but keeping in mind that your voice and your story may help somebody else.
There's no
That's
question that the aspect of building communities, helping people, let's say, feel the sense that they're not alone. These
mhm.
are all very important aspects of social audio that don't require superb sound quality. I mean,
Yeah,
something along the lines of an intercom will serve that purpose, as long
right.
as you can understand what's being said very well.
Yeah,
Um, but the bigger role with social media is that anything you put online, anything, whether it's your words, your pictures, your voice, it's there forever. Even if you
absolutely.
delete it, it's somewhere.
Yeah.
And you have to know that going in, and you have to accept that going in.
Remember the old days? Years ago, people would get mad because they wouldn't go for a job interview and the people would look through their social media
Yeah.
to see what kind of person they were.
Yeah.
And that is what's happening.
Oh,
So,
sure.
I mean, thank goodness that my pictures from college aren't out there.
Yeah.
We all have our stuff, but be careful. Just like when we're teaching our teens what to put out there, the level of maturity out there is questionable sometimes too,
Sure.
obviously. So you never know where your stuff is going to end up and how it's going to be misappropriated and misused as well.
Yeah.
So you have to be mindful of what you put out there.
Yeah. I wouldn't go through a lot of specifics. Anyway, I don't think that's a good idea. When you're doing social audio, you have to reach as many people as possible. So let's say you're talking about some sort of a legal issue you had. You always have to make sure you say this is not specific legal advice or legal protocol. This is what I went through, and it raises the awareness, let's say, of having enough insurance on your car in case you get in an accident. That's the important issue.
Yes.
When you start getting into the details, that's where you have to tell people you have to find a professional and get it nailed down. But a lot of things may not come to people's attention until they have a tragedy of some kind, and that's where these social communities can really help, because it raises awareness a lot of times that maybe you should be investigating certain things. Like one of the things I would say is if you have aging parents and all that, and even for yourself, because even if you are young, you can be in a situation where you're in an emergency room and a very tough decision has to be made. You want to make sure that somebody knows, do you want to be resuscitated? Where is your will? Where is all these other things going on? These are all things that, here again, you don't think about. I made the mistake of realizing that while I was standing in an emergency room with a very sick mother, elderly mother, and realizing I didn't have any of those things. That's not the time
Right.
to realize that. You want to realize that when everybody's healthy, and nobody wants to talk about it when they're healthy. But boy, it saves yourself a lot of grief. So if you can raise awareness for those issues without giving specific legal advice, that's where the value is.
Absolutely. And let me just add to that as well. That's particularly important in the mental health field as well. You don't want to be giving anybody advice of therapy treatment or anything like that. You want to be very clear that that's what worked for you. The same there are so many self-help tools and coaches and all this stuff out here, and I think everybody needs to be careful to do what's right for them. But I also want to piggyback on the idea of that medical clearance and remind people the same is true of your teens. When they go to college, be careful, because like 18 years old, there are scary things that can happen at college. And if you don't have that clearance for your own child, you are not able to make any decisions for them. You cannot access the records of the college university, even if they were under care for a long time and you didn't even know it. You are not allowed to get those records. You have to take, I didn't realize until a few years ago too, that's a whole other age group that people should be aware of as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as sad as it is, and we don't like to consider these things happening, you never know when somebody young is going to get into an accident. A life and death decision has to be made, and you have to make sure that the right person is calling the shots.
Yes. I also, while we're talking about mental health a little bit, we'll throw in there, since we're talking about kids, don't forget to talk about your own health, mental health with your kids. Age appropriate, of course, as they get older. But I know when I've done some of my podcast episodes on teen depression and such, doing the episode itself caused me to have conversations with my own kids. But I'm not sure if I would have, but for doing those podcast episodes. Yes, because I would go to their school and go to some suicide awareness kind of presentation and such, and get so fired up to get the information out there to help people that I'd realize I forgot to tell my own kids.
Sure.
And so it's just like I remember years ago hearing Marianne Williamson say, she was writing her book, and kept shooing her kids away. I'm trying to help people. I'm trying to help people.
Yeah.
And, you can get so caught up in trying to help other people that you can forget about yourself and your own family that is immediately around you too. So be careful with that. I would say to get back onto our subject of moving, if we move social audio to podcasting, I think Wisdom and Clubhouse are both good platforms to do that. The audio quality is better. If you're going to be doing interviews with people that are long distance, sometimes that is working for people. That's what I've been doing a little bit. So something like the Wisdom app, I don't really think of it as social audio necessarily. Yeah. I'm specifically going in there with a purpose, with one person on a mic with me.
Yeah, Wisdom, if you're not aware, and here again, if you're hearing this and you're not new, and you're new to social audio, a lot of this can be confusing. Wisdom has some of the aspects of Twitter Spaces. It's still an audio forum, but it's with two people. Mm-hmm. And you can bring more people up, but one of the two has to drop down. So you, as a host, you have to bring one person down and bring another person up. The sound quality is good, though. I personally feel that Wisdom is kind of like a hybrid. It is a social audio platform, but it has the makings of a production tool as well. So it's kind of a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, though, because people are using it for all sorts of different reasons. There's a timer on it. So when I'm the host, I can set the timer. If I'm interviewing Billy on Wisdom, I can set it for 1 full hour. But if I want to do a show on Wisdom, if I want to technically call it a show and say, I'm coming on here, I'm doing an hour of what are you grateful for? I can set the timer for as little as 2 minutes. And then speakers can come up, and that's all the time they have. Then they're moved down to the audience. So it's really interesting how you can adjust it like that as well. Yeah. So that's kind of good. But I really want to encourage you guys, if you are not on social audio at all, if you've never been interested in it, that's fine, of course. But it is a good way to reach out to other parts of the world, other people that you would not have had contact with in your regular life. And I think it's funny because we talk about our digital lives and our real life, and you talk about friends and you talk about selling. I was just talking to Timothy Hughes recently about selling stuff. And we're like, from a business perspective, you want people to know, like, and trust you.
Yes.
And the best way to do that is through audio. To let them hear your voice and what your intention is. That trust factor, be careful, because that means different things for different people. Just because you meet somebody out here and become friends with them out here, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do a house swap with them. Right. So, I mean, be mindful. And I would say we're all adults out here and can handle it, but that's not necessarily true. So sometimes it's important to have those conversations with other adults out here, not to vent so much as to raise awareness sometimes for scary stuff that can happen too.
Raising awareness, letting people know you or your brand is very important. The cornerstone of that is, in my opinion, is objective information. You don't want your social audio to sound like an advertisement or an infomercial.
Right.
The one thing nice about social audio and audio in general is that it's a very passive medium. People can listen to a space or a wisdom talk while they're doing the dishes or while they're on the treadmill or whatever else. It's not like watching a video or reading something where you have to be occupied with what you're doing. So there's a lot of really good ways, and you'll have people for longer periods of time because of that. Whereas a video, if they don't like the video in a very short period of time because they're sitting there watching it, they'll only give it so much. But if they're on their way to work, they'll listen, for 15 minutes, a half hour. So you have their attention for a longer period of time and you can go over things in more detail. So there's a lot of advantages to social audio for sure.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting that struck me today when I was talking to Tim, he was saying, for instance, on LinkedIn, he advises clients not to put in their profile necessarily just their job title, because he feels like people really want to know who the person is.
Oh,
He
yeah.
wants it to be
Sure.
more personal. The same thing applies in spaces or any of this kind of social audio. If you do get on it and you go into spaces or rooms, a lot of people immediately start to plug their
Oh, yeah.
business immediately with zero consideration for the person who might have just spoken before they did.
Yeah.
So reaching out to other people, you can get a sense for the kind of respect they have
Yeah.
for the group that they're entering.
Mhm.
And everybody has different styles and personality traits, of course. But generally, if you're talking from a business perspective, you want people to come find you because they like you and they want to see what you are selling
Yeah.
and what you're about, you know?
Yeah. I'm not one for touting credentials. I don't know that that's a good idea. That can put a lot of people off.
Yeah.
Talking about how much experience you have and going
Yes.
on and on and on.
How many
Uh,
certificates? Yes.
yeah. And you know, when I hear somebody say, "Well, I've got 1 million downloads to my podcast," and I thought, "Well, you don't
Yes.
need one more, then, do you? See ya." You know. Uh, so
Yes.
you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is objective and sincere, and those connections people will make on their own.
Yeah.
And when they start to like you and trust you as they should because you're a good person,
Yeah.
that they'll make those steps on their own. They don't need to be sold.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Although when the blue dot comes, then everyone's going to be an expert, right?
Yeah. Oh my.
Whatever.
Well, that's
That's a whole
that's
other
going to be
topic.
interesting. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. I think I think it's, you know, I'll just put this out there. I really think the idea of users paying to use social media platforms is overdue. The idea that people here's what the model is. You come on our platform, you interact with your family, you interact with your friends, and we'll monitor your behavior, see what your inclinations are, and we'll send you advertisements that are aimed at the things you like.
Mhm.
And some of that can get pretty invasive. There's a lot of question as to how much these apps are following you when you're not using them, and other things. So the idea, and it's a cliche, but if you're not paying to use a product, and then you probably are the product.
Right.
And you have to be aware of that. I think that model maybe has run its course. What I like about paying to use a valuable platform, especially when we're talking just about a couple dollars a month, is one,
Mhm.
it gives the users rights as a consumer. They
Mhm.
have more rights to suggest features that they like. When you're
Mhm.
using something for free, it's worth exactly what you paid for it. They can
Mhm.
change it anytime.
Right.
When you have a user base that is supporting what they are using, if you piss them off, for lack of a better term, they're going to go somewhere else, and you lose that revenue. There's a risk in losing you then.
Mhm.
So you have a voice.
That's
Uh,
true.
the
Yeah.
other the other thing too is when you're paying to use the platform, you're not going to create 50 accounts just to harass people or whatever. The idea that you are going to be, because you have to enter a payment system, because you have to identify yourself through a legitimate cell phone number, the odds that people are just going to be creating these anonymous identities to such a high degree, it won't eliminate all of them, but it will cut down on a lot of that.
Right.
And the free aspect is not going to go away. There's different levels of things that we all use. You have different levels of your cable. There's some channels you want. There's some channels you don't want, right?
Mhm.
And that's still, from what I understand, still going to be the case with Twitter. There's still going to be a free option. You can still follow all the people you want to follow and do all the things you want to do. But if you're serious about being a creator, you will pay $5 for a coffee. Okay. But for
Mm.
$5 or $8 a month, if you're a serious creator, it's not worth giving that to a platform that is helping you extend the reach of your brand. I don't have an issue with that at all.
Right. Well, it's kind of like Hulu or any of the, streaming services.
Yeah.
If you pay a little more, you don't get commercials.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of idea in some
Yeah.
sense. Some
Absolutely.
aspects of it are. I think identity theft and all that kind of stuff is going to be a problem regardless. There are always going to be those bad
Hmm.
actors out there.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know. We'll see what happens. We'll see what
Yep.
happens.
Yes, we will.
But
we most certainly will. I'm
yes.
optimistic.
Yes.
These the people that are hitting these panic buttons, I think that's way too early. You know, give this a chance. And I really think it needed a shakeup, because all the platforms use the same model that I said, that users are essentially targets for advertising. That model needs shaken up. We got to do this a better way. So
right.
I don't have a problem with that at all.
Yeah, it's interesting we're talking about sound too, because I think the more audio that is involved, it's harder to fake. Like somebody, if somebody goes into a room in a Twitter space and says they're Maria Humphreys, you, Billy, are going to know that it's not me.
Yeah.
Because we all have our own distinct voice. I don't know how AI it's getting better all the time. Who knows? But but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
You mentioned bad actors entering some of these spaces. I haven't had too much of that. There has been one or two that has happened in some of the spaces I've been in. But here again, if you block that person, and that person usually has like 0 followers or 5 followers, all they have to do is create another account. Here again, getting back to having some sort of a verification system by entering a payment method and with a legitimate cell phone number, you're going to have people that are the ability to do that is not going to be as easy. So I think those are all good steps in the right direction.
Right. I do too. So Billy, the Billy Dees podcast. Where can people find your podcast, Billy?
If you can,
everywhere.
It's your favorite podcasting platform. The Billy Dees podcast is all you have to enter. You can follow me real easily on Twitter. I have a linked tree. A link in my Twitter bio. So the other places that I'm on social media are there. There's no question that for right now, Twitter is my social media home. I feel that Twitter is built for podcasting, just like it's built for a lot of other things. The real timeness of it, the trending aspect of it is fantastic for podcasting. It's great for news. It's great for hot issues. And that's where I like to be. So yes. And as far as what it's about, the Billy Dees podcast, we're probably primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. All of the stuff that we talk about, I try to be as nonpartisan as possible. And usually guests are talking about a personal experience. We have a lot of authors who talk about how they wrote their book, how they got the idea for their book. Creators in general come on a lot. So it's just a friendly place. Like I said, no partisan ranting and raving and anything like that. That's not what we're about.
Right. I love it. Too, I just want to say some of the spaces that I've been in with you, Billy, have been with authors. So since you mentioned that, I will say social audio is a great place to meet other authors and to, do little think tanks and brainstorm about marketing, about how to get your stuff out there, but also to meet people that might help you, like Christy Mickelson. I'm going to start helping her with voiceover marketing stuff for some of her books. I think we're talking about it. And so there are all sorts of opportunities out there that you might not have thought of before. It's rewarding for people that need the connection and for business connections as well. There are a lot of uses out here. So, yeah. So thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, Billy, for being here. I love it. And Billy's in the Facebook group, by the way. I'll put a link in the show notes here
absolutely.
For the Facebook group. Also, you guys are more than welcome to join that. You don't have to be a podcaster. Listeners are welcome. People who want to be interviewed on podcasts. If you don't have the courage yet to start a podcast, everybody doesn't need a podcast, of course, but it's really nice to be on podcasts and to get your message and your story out to more people.
Right.
So keep that in mind too. All right. Thanks for being here. Okay. Bye, you guys. Okay.
Thank you for listening.
What a fun conversation. Thank you for being here. thank you, Billy Dees, for spending some of your time with us today. If you guys want to connect with Billy, go ahead and find him. He is on all social media platforms. Check the show notes. If you want to get in touch with him, I am Maria. This is the Strong Body, Strong Soul Show. I'd appreciate if you took a moment to leave a review on the Apple Podcast platform.